If you've ever wondered what it's like to step into the role of Prime Minister with only weeks of preparation, or if you're curious how a young woman could lead New Zealand through crises like the Christchurch mosque shootings and the COVID-19 pandemic, or if you're drawn to memoirs that balance the personal and the political, showing both vulnerability and strength, if so, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'll be reviewing A Different Kind of Power by Jacinda Ardern. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and on this channel, my goal is simple. I read widely across genres, from literary fiction to history to fantasy to memoir to whatever strikes my fancy. And I share thoughtful reviews to help you decide what books might be worth your time and which ones you just can skip. I first heard about today's book, A Different Kind of Power, when I heard Jacinda Ardern on an interview with Oprah, and the way that she talked about leadership and vulnerability really caught my attention. That conversation made me want to pick up the book and see how she reflected on her years as New Zealand's Prime Minister. For those of you that do not know who Jacinda Ardern is, before I get into more details about the book itself, which is a biography of her, I will give you an even quicker biography of her. She was the Prime Minister of New Zealand from 2017 to 2023. She became the youngest woman in the world to lead a government at the time, and her tenure was defined by both compassion and crisis management, most notably her leadership after the Christchurch mosque shooting and during the COVID-19 pandemic. Known internationally for her emphasis on kindness and empathy and collaborative leadership, she stepped down in 2023, choosing to focus on family and new challenges. And this book, A Different Kind of Power, is her reflection on what leadership can look like when it's grounded in empathy rather than ego. However, before I dive into this book, I do have to say that I should give my usual spoiler warning. Now, this isn't a novel with, shocking twists and turns. It's a memoir, so much of Jacinda Ardern's story is already public record. That said, I will be sharing some of the personal stories, reflections, and behind-the-scenes moments that she includes in this book. And so, if you'd prefer to experience those details fresh in her own words, you might want to pause here, read the book, and then come back. And for everyone else, let's take a look at the key themes and the stories that she shares. Ardern begins her memoir on the night of the 2017 election. She had just been thrust into the leadership of the Labour Party weeks earlier, and now in a moment that could make her the youngest Prime Minister in more than 150 years, she found herself waiting for the results of a pregnancy test in a friend's bathroom. It was a startling collision of the personal and the political, the possibility of becoming a world leader and a mother almost at the same time. From there, she rewinds to her childhood. Born in Hamilton in 1980, she grew up in small towns shaped by economic hardship like Murupara, where her father served as a police officer. One moment with him stands out. When confronted by a group of intimidating gang members, he used calm words to diffuse the situation. Later, he told Jacinda, "My words will always be the greatest tool I have." That lesson, that power can come from persuasion and empathy rather than force, stayed with her, and it shaped the way she came to think about leadership. And it's actually, I believe, the thing that inspired the title of this book. Her mother, Laurel, converted to Mormonism after marrying her father, who was already a Mormon, and faith became central to Jacinda's upbringing. She recalls being baptized at 8, participating in youth activities, and absorbing the certainty the church offered. At the same time, as she grew older, she began to wrestle with tensions between church teachings and her own developing views on social issues. At one point, she even spent some time in Arizona. I believe she was at Arizona State, so she was in Mesa, and it was a school opportunity. She was actually drawn there in part by the chance to be around a lot more Mormons. New Zealand has a decent sized population of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but it being a small country in and of itself, I'm sure that the overall population is quite small compared to a place like Arizona. However, she says that living abroad really broadened her worldview while also confirming her doubts about fully belonging to the church. And so her path into politics is going to be gradual. First, she worked behind the scenes, volunteering, joining Labour's youth wing, and later working for Prime Minister Helen Clark, whom she credits as a mentor. In 2008, she entered Parliament as one of its youngest members. Though plagued with self-doubt, she built a reputation for, again, empathy, but also for hard work and an ability to connect with people. Then in 2017, she was unexpectedly asked to lead her party. I think she was only third in line within her party at the time, and if you read the book, you'll find out why exactly. It did not look like they're going to win. They had slowly lost in popularity, and then in this particular election, it looked like they were going to lose big time, and that is when the leader of the party said he was going to step down and he really thought that Jacinda should step up. It turned out to be a winning strategy for them. And so against all odds, you see them actually do far superior in the polls than had been expected, even though there had been a fair amount of criticism of this change late in the game, especially since there was this sense that, it was just meant as a DEI move, but it proved to be an effective move. And so she is going to be elected prime minister. They actually, that night of 2017 was not the election night itself. It was when the smaller party, because there was a split between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, and there was some third party that needed to actually decide who they would build a coalition with, and it wasn't entirely clear. And when they chose to go with the Labour Party, that is what actually put Jacinda in the position to become the prime minister. As prime minister, her time was definitely defined by crisis, but there are also some things that she reflects on. So she recounts the birth of her daughter in 2018, as well as balancing motherhood with the role of global leadership. She remembers appearing at the United Nations with her infant in tow. And of course, she finds all these times where trying to nurse her child, or also just saying this is too hard and giving up on any kind of long-term nursing it's something that she cannot handle, and how that had an effect on her. But also how it also helped her remain committed to what she wanted to do as prime minister, especially by being an example. And then you have the main crises that I've mentioned, and these are going to be big portions of the book. They actually are relatively big portions of the latter half to quarter of the book. She spends a lot of time on her youth and growing up. That is a big part of the book. So be prepared for that. Her time as prime minister, I would say, maybe took up, I should have kept track of this, but it's like a quarter of the book. It was not as much of the book as I thought, especially since she herself was so relatively young. She didn't have tons and tons of chapters on all of her other political history, because it really was, relatively speaking, not a lot. But you are still going to see her talk about the biggest things that certainly did define her time as prime minister. You have the Christchurch mosque shooting in 2019. That certainly tested her leadership profoundly. She chose to respond, of course, with compassion. She was known for wearing a headscarf and embracing victims and families and refusing to name the terrorist who committed the act. She followed that empathy with decisive action, pushing through gun reform in record time. And she even, in the book, details how she went directly to people that had the most invested in guns and what would impact them with gun reform. And they shaped the gun reform laws based off of the feedback that they got from law enforcement and other people that still interacted with guns. And then, of course, you have the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought another trial. Her elimination strategy with strict border closures and lockdowns, it drew international praise, but also criticism as time went on. And she describes that the exhaustion of the nightly decision-making, the struggle of keeping people safe, and the toll of constant criticism. And through it all, she clung to transparency, and I can't say this word enough, but this idea of empathy as her guiding principles. And by 2023, she stepped down, citing that exhaustion as part of it, and a recognition that she no longer had enough in the tank. That was the phrase that she used all throughout her decision to resign. And I think the speech itself that she made to the public about her resigning was acknowledging that she just didn't have enough in the tank, because it takes everything you have. And so for her, leaving, she did not see it as a failure, but just another form of responsibility, because she didn't have what it took. So she felt that leaving was ensuring her country could benefit from new energies, from people that had the ability to give it all that they had. She just feel like she couldn't do anymore. And so the book closes with reflection on what she hopes her legacy will be. And for her, leadership isn't measured by polls or GDP. It's about modeling a different kind of power, hence the name, one that is rooted in compassion, humility, and authenticity. I was really looking forward to this book for two main reasons. First, I have respected Jacinda Ardern from afar. I was struck by her empathy after the Christchurch shootings and always found her rhetoric inspiring. So I wanted to see what she had to say. But I do also admit that I don't usually care for political memoirs. I read several last year, and most sounded the same. They were pretty carefully crafted. They're obviously very self-promotional, and there's elements of them that are hard to trust. Not that any of the single stories are necessarily untrue, but there's just, the whole presentation can come off as just a little inauthentic, and so that was a concern that I had here. But I would say that this memoir felt different. To be clear, it's still going to be selective, and it's going to be designed to present her in the best possible light, especially since her resignation surprised the world. But there is also frankness here that I think a lot of political memoirs might lack. She doesn't really have any more ladders left to climb, at least not in New Zealand. Maybe she has her eyes somewhere else. I don't know exactly what she would be looking at, but I will say that I think that freedom gives her voice a little more openness. The second reason I was curious is actually much more personal, because I was also raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I'm still an active member, and so I was actually curious to see how she would address that. And I actually came away thinking that she was very tactful and quite generous, describing her upbringing quite warmly. I mean, she avoids any real harsh criticism and only briefly noted, political disagreements that led her away from the church. I personally found her explanations for leaving actually a little unsatisfying, just there at that moment where she decided, but I also respect that it's a deeply personal matter. What impressed me most was her gratitude. She even recalled with appreciation President Russell M. Nelson's visit to New Zealand after the Christchurch mosque massacre, and also the financial gift that he brought. And that just, it was interesting to see that a lot of people, when they leave any faith, but I feel like the Mormon faith is even more so, they have a tendency to have very negative feelings towards that faith. That does not seem to be the case for her. She may have her reasons, whether it be around doubt around the faith itself or around faith as a whole, or whether it is, of course, based on these political differences, which is very much a real issue that I think that a lot of churches are facing. And still, she certainly still has a sense of gratitude, and she doesn't have to, but I would like to know even more so her thoughts on that, if she'd ever care to expound on it. But she probably won't, because I was surprised at just how much she did talk about it very openly, but also I thought, like I said, very generously in this book. Overall, I generally appreciated the openness that I found all throughout this book, not just on that one topic, but just generally. And I will say, overall, coming away from this book, and I'd have to say that my appreciation from her, at least from afar, is very much still intact after reading this, and actually has probably been increased. And that is something that I certainly enjoyed from this book. That being said, who is this for? Well, this book is for readers who want leadership stories that emphasize empathy and humanity over bluster and dominance. If you followed Jacinda Ardern from afar, and you admired her crisis leadership or wondered why she stepped down, this book lets you hear her reflections very directly. It's also a good choice for readers who don't usually like political memoirs, in my opinion. I think that her voice is more personal and vulnerable than most, and her stories about her upbringing, her family, and formative experiences add depth beyond her time in office. Finally, it's for anyone curious about what leadership could look like in the modern era. She frames her experience as an argument for a different model of power, hence the name, one built on kindness, collaboration, and listening. And if you're interested in ideas about political culture or gender and leadership, or just the human side of governing, I think this memoir has plenty to offer you. So who is this not for? This is still political memoir, so if you dislike the genre, you'll see the usual limitations. I do think that she chooses her stories that keep her image positive, and she avoids deep dives into policy detail or any really harsh self-criticism. And if you strongly disagree with her politics, you may also struggle with the book. That said, I don't think it's preachy. Her reflections are more personal than moralizing, and even if you don't share her politics, there's still much to appreciate in her story, from her small town upbringing to her family's influence to her views on empathy in leadership. A Different Kind of Power is a thoughtful and engaging memoir that highlights Jacinda Ardern's unique approach to leadership. It's less about political maneuvering and more about how empathy, humility, and resilience shaped her journey from small town New Zealand to the world stage. While it's still a political memoir, carefully curated and selective, I found it refreshingly personal and sincere in many ways. Of course, I'd love to hear what you think. Have you read this memoir? Or do you have another political memoir that actually stood out to you that you do think is above and beyond the other political memoirs? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. While you're here, be sure to check out more of my videos and playlists, whatever your reading taste may be, history, fantasy, literary fiction, or memoirs. I'm confident you'll find something that catches your interest. After all, the name of the channel is Spencer Reads Everything. And if you enjoy my reviews, please share them. The more people who discover this channel, the more content I can create. And don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. And until next time, keep those pages turning.